This is a demonstration of Mesos DCOS with OpenContrail. In this demo, we will cover the topology, the current setup as it looks today, followed by a demonstration of how Mesosphere orchestrated workloads or containers can be attached to OpenContrail virtual router. Once attached, they will have access to the features that OpenContrail provides today. The demo topology looks like this. I have two Tor switches and a gateway router, a separate management switch for management and control data separation, three Contrail controllers for HA, two virtual machines running Mesos master and Mesos boot, two Contrail nodes each having a virtual router and a Mesos slave. We have a bare metal server in green network to show container to bare metal connectivity. We will be launching Docker containers from DCOS on the computes, attaching them to virtual router and demonstrating connectivity within and across virtual networks. So again, a brief overview of the setup: three Contrail controllers, two Contrail compute nodes, Contrail web UI which is running, Mesos boot and Mesos master. Mesos boot pushes JSON files to Mesos master, which then configures and provisions the containers on the compute nodes. Whereas Mesos master pushes configuration to Mesos slave, which resides on the Contrail computes. And I also have a Mesos DCOS web UI running. So let's take a look. So here I have two virtual routers, three control nodes, three analytic nodes, three config and three database. So this is a Contrail HA setup. I have two compute nodes, server 2 and server 3, with the following IP addresses. Also on the setup, I've configured two networks. These networks are network blue and network green. Blue having an IP address of 192.168.1 and green 192.168.2.0. So let's move on to the CLI portion and verify all the three controllers. So when you do Contrail status, everything looks good here. We'll do the same thing for controller 3. Moving on to the compute nodes, server 2. So here we see that we have one container already running. So let's access this controller and see what IP does it have. This container belongs to virtual network blue. Moving on to the second compute node, which is server 3. If you do a Docker PS, there are no containers currently running on this compute. The DCOS web UI shows one app running in blue network, and there are two connected nodes. The nodes are 180.2 and 181.1. So let's quickly verify the IP addresses of these compute nodes. So server 2 is 180.2 and server 3 is 181.1. So now let's move on to the next step. So the next step is to deploy apps using Mesos DCOS. So here we are going to deploy three containers. Let's first look at the JSON for each of these containers. So if you look at yellow-1, we see that type is Docker, image is Ubuntu 14.04, network is none, and ID is yellow-1. Similarly for yellow-2, the ID is myapp-yellow-2. Now the third container that we are going to launch is myapp-green-1. So let's go ahead and launch the first container. So our first app is launched. If we log on to server 2 and do a docker ps, we'll see that the first container has been launched on server 2. Now let's go ahead and launch the remaining two apps, yellow-1 and yellow-2. Now if we look at the DCOS web UI, we could see all these apps which just have been launched. Now if we look at server 2, we continue to see the two containers. On server 3, we see the other two containers. So in other words, the yellow app has been launched on server 3, whereas the green app has been launched on server 2. So just to make sure, let's access app 1, which is the green app, and see if it got any IP address. Since we have not yet assigned an IP address or attached it to virtual router, there is no currently IP address. So in the next step, we'll be stitching Docker containers to virtual router. So here we'll create a yellow network and then run the script that stitches the 3 containers to the vRouter. So what the script does is the following. It creates a VM object in Contrail, creates a virtual machine interface, creates a veth pair, attaches the veth pair between container and vRouter, executes dn client upon which vRouter provides an IP address. So let's go ahead and run these steps. So first of all, on server 2 for green app, we'll go ahead and run the script. So here, if you see, green network was already configured. Now just to make sure, let's go ahead and access the green container and see if an IP address was assigned or not, whether this IP address was assigned or not. So here we see 192.168.2.3, which is actually our green network. So in order to move forward, for the yellow app or yellow containers, we'll create the yellow network. Let's create it 192.168.3.0/24. So network has been created. Now we can go back to server 3, which has both the apps in already running, and let's attach each of these containers to the virtual router. Let's do the same for the second container. So now all 3 containers are now attached to the virtual router. So just to make sure, let's see whether the yellow containers actually got an IP address. So we can see here 192.168.3.4 is an IP address which was assigned to the yellow container. So the next step would be to verify connectivity within the virtual network. So since both of our containers or our apps were launched on server 3, we will access both of the containers and then try to ping each other. Since both of these containers are on the same virtual network, we should be able to ping. So if you see here, the IP addresses are 3.3 and 3.4. From 3.4, we're going to ping 3.3 and the ping goes through. So the next step would be to have two containers communicate over two different virtual networks. So server 2, we're going to use our green app. Let's go ahead and access that app. And if you see here, the IP address is 192.168.2.3. And the IP address on the yellow app is 192.168.3.3. So when we try to ping 192.168.2.3 from 192.168.3.3, this would not work. In order for this to work, we need to create a policy. So the policy would be created between networks green and yellow. So here we'll create a policy green to yellow -allow. Source would be green and the destination would be yellow. The next steps are to basically attach this policy to each network. So now that the policies are attached, we should be able to communicate between the two. So the next step is to basically show connectivity between the app and a bare metal server. So the first thing we need to do here is to extend the green network to the gateway. So let's quickly take a look at the configuration on our router. But before we do that, let's go ahead and extend our green network to, in our case, gateway being the MX. So we'll say extend. Now before we save, let's go ahead and take a look at the configuration on the MX. So we see here, this is the basic configuration between Contrail and our router. Now once we hit save, Contrail using device manager and netconf will push the configuration directly to the MX. So we see here configuration which was pushed to the MX. So here we are using EVPN and VxLAN to communicate between our app running in the green network and a bare metal server residing on the same network. So we have a bare metal server and its IP is 192.168.2.200 and the app IP is 192.168.2.3. And this basically shows that we do have connectivity between our app and the bare metal server. So next, we'll apply a policy to stop ICMP traffic between virtual network green and virtual network yellow. So on our policy, we'll mark action as deny and protocol will choose ICMP. So once that's done, we see that we are no longer able to ping container green. So now if we go ahead and change the policy back to pass, we should have our connectivity. So basically now we have connectivity within the virtual network, across virtual networks, and from a container to a bare metal server. So the next case we would like to demonstrate is container failure and recovery. So on our server 3, we had 2 apps running. We'll stop and remove one of the apps. So as you can see, the particular app was created 14 minutes ago, and we're going to stop it and then followed by a Docker remove. And if we do a Docker PS, we would see that the same app was relaunched and you can see that the app is back on the DCOS web UI. So just to summarize, on the Contrail web UI, we now see 4 instances. And we have server 2, and let's look at the interfaces on server 2. So here we have 2 instances on server 2, one app running in the blue network and the other app running in the green network. Similarly, on server 3, we should have 2 apps running, and both of these apps would be running in the yellow network. Now let's take a look at the policy and traffic statistics. So these are the 2 networks, green and yellow, and this is the policy that we applied. Now if we click on the arrow between green and yellow, we will see the traffic statistics. So this essentially is the ping traffic, and here we see the source and destination network. Hopefully this demonstration was useful.